The world's largest rocket was stacked at the pad, and that means once again, Starship was undergoing full stack testing ahead of its next flight, but, well, suffice to say that testing did not exactly go as planned. As always, while action ramps up at the launch site, new boosters are starting to get built, new buildings are about to go up at Starbase, and even more Starship launch pads are in the works. What's up, Star fans? I'm Jack Beyer for NSF, and this is your Starbase Update. Now, before we get into all of the testing that's been going on this week, we should probably talk about what's been going on elsewhere at Starbase, just for context. It's well known by now that SpaceX is preparing a second launch tower to be built at Starbase to increase the launch cadence in the near future. Well, this week we finally saw teams building up Section 8 of this tower at the Sanchez site, where they have the spots to build up and park these sections of Tower 2. Or, I guess it's Tower 3, since Tower 2 is already at Kennedy Space Center. But it's Tower 2 for Starbase, so whatever, you get it. In any case, we often see a lot of people confused as to why they're building sections at Starbase when SpaceX already built tower sections in Florida that are being moved there as we speak. Well, the fact is that those are not all of the sections that are needed to build a tower. Sections 8 and 9 of the tower, the uppermost two sections, were never completely built at Kennedy Space Center, and that is why they're being built now at Starbase instead. And speaking of the tower sections that are currently being moved to Starbase, over the last week or so, the tug and barge that are carrying those 4 tower sections have made really good progress across the Gulf of Mexico, but lately they seem to have slowed down. The arrival of the barge and tower sections is now not expected earlier than Tuesday, February 20th. So to summarize this whole tower section mess, here's what's happening right now. Tower sections 8 and 9 are currently under construction at Starbase, with Section 8's structure now almost complete. Tower Section 7, as you may remember, was moved to Starbase a few months ago and is now sitting at the port of Brownsville. Tower Sections 1, 2, 3, and 6 are being transported to South Texas via barge, and Tower Sections 4 and 5 are still at Kennedy Space Center and will likely move to Starbase at a later time. If I were to guess, probably around late next month. In more Starship Tower-related news, this week we learned that SpaceX is planning to build a Starship launch pad at the Cape. The environmental process is already underway for this project, which would be built at Space Launch Complex 37. This is the same pad where ULA launches the Delta IV Heavy rocket, but with its last flight set for next month, the launch pad will become vacant. According to the project's website, the whole environmental study process is likely to take until fall of next year, so there'll be a good amount of time for SpaceX to properly go in and start preparing Slick 37 for Starship. An alternative location for this would be to build the new Starship launch and landing site at a new location, which would be Space Launch Complex 50. Regardless of whether it goes to 37 or it gets built at 50, that'll be another location to launch Starship in the near future. In fact, Slick 37 is probably big enough to host not 1, but maybe 2 or even 3 Starship launch towers and orbital launch mounts. So those pads, plus the one at 39A, plus the 2 in Starbase, means there'll be a good amount of Starship launch facilities ready in the near future. More launch pads? More better. Speaking of things getting built and moving back to Starbase now, this week we saw the beginnings of a new parking structure getting built between Remedios Avenue and the Stargate building. This should help alleviate the lack of parking in and around Starbase. Now let's move over to the production site where work is continuing on the door for Mega Bay 1. In fact, it's already been in use for a few days now, and yep, we can't see inside anymore, so yeah, that's not great. Now we have to hope the door gets open from time to time, even if it's for a quick peek into the building to see what's going on inside. In fact, the last time the door was opened, we got a nice surprise. Do you notice anything different here? Like, where's Booster 12? Prior to the door closing, we were able to see Booster 12 in the middle location and Booster 11 on the right, but now only Booster 11 is visible from this view. Well, the reason may very well be that Booster 12 has been moved from the middle work stand to the one sitting on the left-hand side of the Megabay where Booster 10 had been sitting. Another thing that happened inside Megabay 1 was the beginning of stacking of Booster 14's liquid oxygen tank. That's right, there's yet another booster under construction at Starbase, and 2 barrel sections have already been moved inside the Megabase, so the LOX tank is likely now halfway done, with the common dome section and those 2 other barrels welded together inside. If SpaceX doesn't skip over any boosters, Booster 14 will be used for Starship's 7th flight, which is just sort of crazy to think about. Meanwhile, at Megabay 2, work continues outfitting the roof of the building. I gotta say, I'm really glad they're not focusing on the door just yet like they did with Megabay 1 because it'll give us a little bit more time to peek inside of it. Besides the new parking garage, before long, the skyline at the production site will be changing even more with the addition of yet another new building. In this case, it's set to be an office building which will be 5 stories tall. This building will be located at San Martin Boulevard, right next to the Star Factory, and it may very well replace the functions and duties of the Stargate building. This definitely looks like another step in the consolidation of SpaceX activities in Starbase. It started by building proper high bays in which to stack the rockets, and then by building a proper factory instead of, just tents. And now it looks like even the management side of things will get a nice, shiny new building. Okay, now let's talk about the launch site, and oh boy, there's a lot going on this week, but I guess the intro kind of gave that away. If you watched our last Starbase update, you're probably aware that we had to do a last-minute change to the video because Ship 28 was destacked from Booster 10. This happened pretty much the day after it was stacked for the first time. It kind of looks like something went wrong during that first stacking because after it was destacked, workers had to go and check on the aft end of Ship 28, and the ship was actually not even placed down entirely on its stand. It took at least half a day until the ship was finally brought down onto its transport stand. I guess that satisfying thump we heard during the first stacking could have actually been a bad thing. Ship 28 was restacked again on Booster 10 a day later, and this time no obvious issues occurred. Shortly after that, SpaceX posted on Twitter video and pictures of this stack saying, quote, "Starship team is preparing for a full launch rehearsal ahead of Flight 3. Alright, with Booster 10 and Ship 28 stacked on the pad, let's talk full stack testing. On Wednesday, we were all getting ready to see SpaceX perform a wet dress rehearsal, which we often shorten to WDR. The village and production site were evacuated as to be expected for a test like this, and the tank farm spooled up. Earlier in the day, the chopsticks were also open, letting us see the full stack in all its glory. There were some troubles with the tank farm at the beginning of the road closure window, and the red team had to head to the pad to fix things on it, and also the ship QD, before resuming testing. After several hours, propellant load finally started on the stack. We began seeing frost on the ship, and then there was an abort. The propellant load was stopped, the ship defrosted, and the road was reopened. We don't really know what might have happened, but it's not surprising to see problems arise given the amount of new hardware that has been installed at the tank farm since Flight 2 of Starship. This new hardware includes new pumps and subcoolers. Some of this hardware was already shaken up when Booster 10 came here for engine testing, but even then, this testing suffered an abort on its first attempt and had to be reattempted about a week later. This time around though, it was the first time the new tank farm hardware was used with a ship. For Flight 1 and 2, the tank farm had subcoolers and pumps that were all used for both ship and booster. But after these additions, there are now a dedicated set of subcoolers solely for the ship. So yeah, we had an abort, but wasn't really surprising given the scope of all of the changes. At the very least, during this first wet dress rehearsal attempt, we got to see a test of the water deluge system, which was a nice consolation prize. We also saw afterwards a series of tests of the fire suppression system on Booster 10. As a reminder, this system flushes carbon dioxide inside the engine bay during flight to avoid fires within it. This flushed CO2 is vented overboard through vents on the engine section, and that's how we can identify when it's being tested. Between attempts 1 and 2 of the wet dress rehearsal, we saw teams working on the booster, the ship, and its quick disconnect all day long. It's likely they were trying to fix whatever prompted the abort on Wednesday and preparing the vehicles and ground support systems for another attempt. But not all of it was about fixing things. SpaceX went into patriotic mode and unfurled a giant US flag once again on the launch tower. This probably being because of President's Day. Last time SpaceX did this, it was ahead of 4th of July last year. Anyway, on Friday, SpaceX attempted for a second time to conduct a full-stack wet dress rehearsal. Once again, Starbase and Boca Chica Village were evacuated, and the tank farm spooled up. The day was foggy and humid, but that made for some really killer scenery of fog versus tank farm venting as the tank farm became more and more active. Sean got some pretty cool shots of it, as I'm sure the editor is showing right now on screen. Propellant load began, and this time we were able to see frost on all 4 of the main tanks of the full stack, and things proceeded much further into the process than the first attempt. However, once again, propellant load was stopped and detanking began. Just like with the first attempt, we don't really know what happened, but surely something must not be completely right if both of these tests were aborted early into propellant load. This could have something to do with changes to the order or speed of loading the vehicles, as for both of these wet dress rehearsal attempts, we saw the ship loaded first, as opposed to all previous wet dress rehearsals and launches, where frost formed on the booster first. Either way, at least we got some cool views of all the tanks depressing afterwards, with the contrast of the fog and cloudy skies. Sure, a bright and sunny day is always nice, but there's something about these moody, stormy days with a rocket coming alive and venting all over the place. Just can't be beat. And so now, here we are. After 2 aborted wet dress rehearsal attempts, we wait to see what happens next with Booster 10 and Ship 28. Shortly after Friday's attempt was aborted, the chopsticks went in and hugged Ship 28, and that pretty much sealed the deal for the end of wet dress rehearsal attempts for a little while. It's true that the chopsticks don't always open for wet dress rehearsals. After all, Flight 2's WDR happened with the chopsticks only slightly open. But when they do open for a WDR, and then they close again afterwards, well, it probably means we won't see another WDR for a little bit. This is compounded by the fact that Ship 28 was destacked from atop Booster 10 once again on Sunday. Ship 28's transport stand had been moved next to the orbital launch mount during the week, so this makes sense. There's also a transport closure for February 20th from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. Central that is said to last 1 hour. This is often the case for rollouts from the production site to the launch site, or vice versa. And right now, it doesn't seem like there would be a reason to roll Ship 28 back to the production site. But if teams found something on this vehicle after 2 aborted attempts, it may well be a good reason to roll it back and fix it before continuing with full stack testing. It could also be that Ship 28 will be moved over to Pad B for engine testing, perhaps even by the time you watch this. In case you missed it, there was some Raptor activity with Ship 28 just before it rolled out, with an RVAC and a sea-level Raptor uninstalled before something, either new engines or the same ones, we don't know, were reinstalled. We were all pretty surprised Ship 28 went right to the orbital pad for stacking without any engine testing after this, so maybe now, with the wet dress rehearsal issues, SpaceX will get that testing done, while it completes other fixes to the orbital tank farm, or booster, or whatever is being done ahead of the next wet dress rehearsal attempt. Another reason for these closures could be for SpaceX to roll Ship 29 from the production site to the launch site for engine testing. This week, we saw the 2-point lifter being moved to the launch site, and this wouldn't really be needed unless SpaceX wanted to lift a ship with the LR-11000 crane at the launch site, so this could be for either Ship 29 or Ship 28. That being said, it would be pretty funny if SpaceX pulls a SpaceX and doesn't end up using the 2-point lifter or the road closure. That's just how things go sometimes. In any case, we'll be keeping our eyes on everything going on down in Starbase, and you can too with our 24/7 live stream, Starbase Live. Of course, as soon as there's any testing going on, we will have a dedicated stream with commentary. So, as cliche as it is, hit the like button, hit the bell, subscribe, so that you can not only support us, and you don't even have to spend money to do it, but you also get notified when we go live or we have a new video published. Alright, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget, be excellent to each other.